Hello, my name is Jon Davies. I am the CEO of InsuredHQ, and today we're going to be talking about startup governance and advisory boards.
Hi, I'm Banicevich. Welcome to Governance Bites. As you just heard, today I have the pleasure of spending time with Jon Davies. Jon, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
You did introduce yourself as CEO of InsuredHQ. You have a lot more experience in that. You've been involved in startups, both here and in the US.
Yes.
You've been involved in funding, generating funding for startups. You've been involved in some boards as well. And you've been involved in setting up advisory boards. So a good person to talk to about this topic. To start with, why do some startups create advisory boards?
An advisory board is really the mechanism to evolve thinking. So what you have with a lot of founders are lots of blind spots, lots of areas of inexpertise inside their domain of expertise. And so what you want to seek out is advisory board that kind of flattens out that structure, gives them a more robust perspective, the ability to have dialogues about specific things. And really it's about time to execution. So they want to be able to make informed decisions as rapidly as possible, which in my opinion is the real role of a good advisor at that early stage.
Right. And so a lot of it is about filling the knowledge gaps?
Yes. Yep. Filling in the knowledge gaps and taking advice from someone who experientially has been there before.
Right.
They've been there, they've done that, they've got the T-shirt, they've wrecked the T-shirt, they've burnt it to the ground, they've rebuilt the T-shirt, they've made it more awesome, and then they've had success, hopefully somewhere along the way.
So you can learn from someone else's mistakes instead of making them all yourself.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's my biggest superpower that I think, bring to most.
How do they then differ from formal boards?
The biggest thing is there's no fiduciary obligations, right? So an advisory board is just that. It's meant to elevate a founder's thinking and focus up to a higher kind of, I call it cruising altitude.
Yes.
So it would be, let's bring you up to the 30,000 foot perspective. Let's look at what you're doing from a strategic, not a day-to-day kind of tactical level. So you can make more informed decisions that are best for the business, not necessarily for you. So, having that friction is kind of good.
Yes.
Where an advisor will challenge the thinking of a founder in a constructive way. But it's all strategic. It's not technical. They're in the weeds. They're operating all the time.
Yeah.
Let's elevate you up to think about the business at a higher altitude.
And as you say, an advisor essentially is the all care, no responsibility thing, right? They're coming in there trying to give their best advice and so forth, but they don't have that full liability of a director.
That's right. But you do want to incentivize them around success, right? And so providing some key metrics of what success may look like and incentivizing around that at the early stages, I think is key to keep them engaged for as long as possible.
How much of that is perhaps an equity stake versus some other form of remuneration?
I think it should all be equity. The biggest challenge for any startup is cash at hand. That's why they have to raise venture capital often. They go through friends and family. They go through angel and seed rounds, pre-seed rounds before they go to even venture capital. The cash at hand is very important, especially when you're pre-revenue, because you don't have any revenue to supplement the capital that you have. And so you create incentives around, specific KPIs so you can have, access to accruing some kind of equity within the business at different milestones. So it could be when we raise, this will create a milestone event that will mean that you accrue a certain amount of equity.
Right.
Or it could be time-based. After a year, you'll accrue some equity. So that advisor stays around, hopefully stays engaged, and gives their best to that startup and those founders.
Right, okay. What are the common mistakes that early stage companies make in the governance space?
There's a couple. The biggest one, I think, is in startup land, oftentimes there's this thing called the pursuit of the logo, where you can acquire Nike, and then you put Nike on your website and you've got that logo there. And the same kind of mentality can also apply in the advisory space, where you acquire that person because of their status within the startup world, within kind of the advisory world, and I call it all sauce, all sizzle, no meat. So you get the sizzle going on, the sizzle factor, but there's nothing of value behind there because they may not be domain experts, they may not have the time, or they may not have the motivation to get involved properly.
Right.
And so, behind the curtain, it all falls flat. The other part is data in, data out. So if you set up the framework for strategic success, you're going to have a lot more output if you put in the right inputs. And this is not, oftentimes you'll see founders kind of roll their eyes and it's a box checking exercise, right? But that's the wrong strategic incentive. You put in the right incentive and you can get the value out of it on the back end.
Right. Okay. Right. What should founders then look for in an advisor? You mentioned before the risks associated with getting a big name if they're not really buying in. What should they look for?
For me, what I would look for and what I promote people to look for is the experiential scars. So it's have you built the t-shirt? Have you burnt the t-shirt? Have you rebuilt the t-shirt? Yeah. But what have you failed at? What kind of resilience did you exhibit during that failure? What kind of success did you experience beyond those failures? Has it been repetitive? Was it a one-time success? So you're looking at what they have experientially to offer. And then you also look at what kind of time commitments they can make in terms of contribution to the business, contribution to you. It's not just about, the cadence of having meetings. It's all those ad hoc things that add value. And then underneath that, it's what can they bring to the table in terms of actual business. So do they have the right networks that you need access to? Do they have the right connections to connect and people and connectivity in Silicon Valley, in my experience, is the biggest currency that people have. And it's traded all the time on a daily and a weekly basis. Oh, you don't know this guy? Let me introduce you. And there's no incentive that people have in terms of expectations back. It's just what people do in Silicon Valley, which was my biggest learning experience taking away from my time there.
In my experience, we do that here too, right?
Yep.
You introduce people to other people all the time.
Yep.
That you think they might connect with and have some mutual benefit from.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Is there a magic number of advisors or a point where you've got too many advisors and it starts becoming noise?
Yeah. Beyond 3, I think, is a mistake. And, you're looking at the pillars from, business development, operations, strategy. But also there's this time gated thing to look at too. Like, I am not good at a company that's beyond scaling because I don't know anything. I don't have that specialty experience. I am a generalist. I know the cold start problem. I know how to execute on the cold start problem and get them into scale mode. Beyond that, my value as an advisor is very much diminished. It's time to go.
Right.
You bring in another advisor, or maybe that's when you start formal governance, right? At that point, you bring in those people that have that more specialized expertise.
So a couple of things that came out there. One was founder plus 3 advisors is probably about the limit of where you want to go.
Yep. Well, founders, normally,
Right,
solo founder is generally considered more of a liability than having 2.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So you get founders plus 3 advisors, and you also want to be in a position to know, and this is from both sides of the equation, when an advisor is no longer in their sweet spot and adding value, it's time for them to leave and have somebody else come in.
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation because there is ego involved. But if you set your your advisory board up for success, making it about the business, not about the people, those conversations can be easier to have.
And also, if you're able to have the KPIs in advance saying, this is the period of time for which we need you, you've got the skill set from here to here. Once we reach here, thank you.
Yep, that's right.
You've done your job.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, right.
And I'm sure in your governance roles, you may have seen the opposite true, right? Where you have CEOs that are very capable within a certain stage of a business. Once they reach that stage, it's time to move on to another more experienced CEO for that part of the business in that
Yes.
stage of its life.
Yeah,
Yep.
in similar case, you've got startup CEOs, you've got scale-up CEOs.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely for the different stage of the business.
Yeah.
We talked before about the best way to structure the engagement, and equity is often the way to go because startups is cash rich. How involved should those advisors be in the actual decisions in the business? What's the level at which those advisors are going to operate?
Yeah, so operationally, they should not generally touch operations. They should only be involved at the strategic layer. And so the general cadence, I think, should be you meet 3 to 4 times a year in a formal way. There'll be ad hoc reasons to meet all the time, just to bounce ideas off, to consult around specific things, to provide introductions, those kind of things. That being said, I do have a cadence of meeting weekly with some startups, just because that process that they have of, they all go their separate ways, doing their stuff, business development, product.
And you got to bring them back in together to see where they're at.
Yeah, yeah. So you're hurting them, because in a business and even at the strategic layer, there's a friend of mine that kind of developed this theory, and I think there's a book in there one day. There's 3 kinds of people that you need to run a business. You have pirates, shepherds, and shippers. So the pirates are the swashbuckler, innovative leaders that are like leading the way. Let's go. You have the shepherds that herd all the people towards this path. And then you have the Sherpas that do all the heavy lifting.
Right.
And so the same is true for founders. And they're not, composed of just one of those archetypes. They're composed of several of those, but one is more dominant than the other.
Yes.
And so when you bring all those pirate shepherds and Sherpas together, you can get a more balanced...
That's when the magic happens.
Yeah, that's right.
Pirates never deliver anything.
Yeah, but they know where to go.
They just want someone else to do the work for them. Yeah, absolutely. They're not necessarily invested. What's worked best for you in terms of keeping advisors motivated, keeping them helpful in this process?
Listening well, I think, because you can have a session where you just want to bounce ideas off someone, right? But you also want to be in the position where you are the dumbest or the most inexperienced person in the room. And if that is true, which is what you want your advisors to be, the smartest people about this specific topic that you can get access to, you need to spend a really good amount of time listening and asking questions about what it is that they're saying, so you really understand.
So show them that you value their expertise.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's key. We also, whenever there's events or team events or team communications that go out, they're involved. So it's giving them that sense of ownership strategically of the business and the success that we're having, but also feeling like they're valued on that relationship on a one-to-one basis.
Right, okay. How do you know whether your advisory board is working or not?
There's a few ways, but you'll know in terms of you are making valuable decisions. So at a cadence that you could not do alone. So you've managed to make a decision about a specific topic, be it fundraising, which is in startup land is the most important one. You're able to make these decisions and understand the implications of those decisions in a way more informed and valuable way than you would be able to do it kind of out there alone in isolation. You would feel, I think that's the main one, actually.
Right.
I was like, well, what does an advisory board mean to me? It is the informed decision at a cadence that is faster than I would ever imagine doing solo.
Doing it alone.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good definition. Have you ever found yourself in a position where an advisor isn't working out and you've had to let them go? And how did you deal with it?
Yeah. So oftentimes advisors are there for the prestige or for the ego or, for other reasons. And oftentimes there is a level of value that you're not getting out of that relationship, right? And so it'd be quite obvious in terms of, their engagement, your engagement with them, the frequency of the meetings, and then obviously the value that they add to the business and you as a leader in that business. And there are times when you have to have the conversation with people about their role in the business and how it needs to come to an end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. How have you handled those conversations?
Awkwardly, but in person.
Right.
So, running a business, especially in the US, you hire and fire a lot of people, and it's not that different. And in the US, it's obviously very different than in New Zealand because,
Excellent.
hey, you don't work for me anymore. Thank you, bye. Right, it is at will. And so you go through enough of those that you develop an experience where you can actually have those conversations. I don't know if a lot of founders have that experience, because I've run a business where, I used to run a outdoor guiding business where we would hire 120 guides a year, and we would recruit all of them. And so I have this history of hiring and hiring and hiring very rapidly. What I do now actually as an advisor is coach people through that process of letting people go who are employees.
Right.
And so, as an advisor, I'm giving experience now of like, this is how you let people go. This is the process that you have to follow. These are the conversations that you're going to have with this person. Do you want to practice on me?
Yeah, right. And one of the interesting things I think with an advisor, which you said before, you're often setting them up with a contract of you deliver this thing and we'll deliver you equity.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're having this conversation, it's because they're failing to deliver this thing. You may find yourself in a position, if that contract is not written well, where they'd be saying, well, I haven't delivered that thing yet.
Right.
We've got a contract, you owe me. So it'd be quite difficult to, I'm sure, have those conversations around, well, I promised you 3%, 5% equity, whatever it may be. You haven't delivered, so you're leaving with no equity or...
Yeah. Whenever people are thinking of contracts, everyone generally, and this is my experience as an advisor to startups, thinks of the upside.
Yes.
They never contract in the downside.
Yeah. Right.
So as an advisor, for me, it's very important when I'm having these discussions with founders as, what do we do if this doesn't work out?
Yes.
It's very important to understand that we're going to hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so, and that, if your advisor isn't contracting that into any agreement that you're coming to, that would be a red flag for me.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And there's some value you're already adding when in the early stages of the conversation. So you've got to talk about the downside. What advice would you give to a first-time founder about putting together an advisory group? I mean, that's a key one as a starting point when you have a contract in place and make sure you're looking at the downside as well as the upside.
Yes. Step one is the gap analysis. So there's probably a lot of things that people aren't even aware of that are gaps within their experience.
Yeah.
But you start with the things that you're probably pretty bad at, and it's likely fundraising, it's likely go-to-market, it's likely, all the commercial stuff, because oftentimes a lot of these founders are coming in from an experience within the market, an identification of the opportunity, and then an idea of the product of how to solve that, but none of the commercial acumen that's required to scale a business rather than launch.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So identify your gaps.
Yep. So oftentimes it's commercial, or it's also operational. Like right now, the experience is we don't, where I'm coming in and being more involved is we want to build the product. We're having a hard time running the business. We need help running the business. And running a business, I call it the long tail of bullshit. Am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Sure, you do.
I call it the long tail of bullshit, is all of these things that you have to do to run a business are actually oftentimes distracting from the mission at hand.
Yes.
And so identifying those, understanding what those are, And managing them is a very important thing to do as a founder, which is where advisors come in.
Right.
And how can those be taken away from their plate so they can focus on the mission,
Yes.
which is building the product, getting the commercials right, launching that product into a market rather than dealing with, what insurance premiums I have to pay as a business and how my bank account
staff.
works. Yeah.
Yeah.
And building out processes for your business,
Yes.
right? Your HR manual, all of those things are necessary, but a distraction from the mission.
Yes, right. Jon, thank you very much. It's been a really cool conversation. Really enjoyed it. Thank you. Let's catch up again soon.
Yeah.
And
Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
see you next episode. Thank you for watching this episode of Governance Bites. We have more episodes on YouTube and your favorite podcast channel, where I interview directors and experts on various topics relating to boards of directors and governance. We'd love to see you back, and please like, subscribe, and share the videos and podcasts.